We are just 14 days away from the next Democratic debate, and we know two key issues that will be taking center stage: guns and the environment. This renewed focus on those issues comes as candidates adjust what voters say they need to appeal on. Young voters, Generation Z, they have become a key focus for a lot of Democratic contenders. The younger generation is more engaged than past generations have been, with many leaning Democratic, and emphatically so. Joining me now, Axios political reporter Alexi McCammond, director of polling at the Harvard Institute of Politics, my friend John Della Volpe, and back with me, Emily Tish Sussman. John, you've got some interesting data on younger voters. For starters, turnout doubled in the last midterm election compared to 4 years earlier. I just want to bring up the stats. 33% in the 2018 midterms compared to 16% in 2014. Traditionally, we know that senior citizens show up and vote. But suddenly, are young people saying, this is my country, I got to get out there?
Yes, and you hit the nail on the head when we talked about Gen Z. It's this 18 to 24-year-old cohort who is as engaged as any generation that we have seen in probably 50 years. They voted at presidential-like levels, higher than Gen Z, higher than baby boomers, higher than older millennials when they had that chance. Not only are they voting in historic numbers, and a lot of people, even on this network, roll their eyes when we predicted this, right before the election.
We don't roll our eyes.
No, others perhaps did. But it was true. They said they were going to do it, and they did it. But more importantly, the dramatic change in terms of how they think about politics. In 2000, as many young people voted for Bush as Gore. Okay, it was such a 50-50. In fact, older people were more progressive in the 2000 election. Now it's a 36 to 38 point partisan gap. So I think they're more engaged and far more progressive than any other generation that we've measured since I've been doing this at Harvard for 20 years.
All right, Alexi, polling shows clearly that Joe Biden is ahead of the pack, but not with young voters. Can he secure the nomination without getting their vote?
Well, as we've seen in the 2018 midterms, as we talked about, Democrats certainly benefit from younger voters turning out. But you're right that Joe Biden might be in the lead. But even his campaign and senior campaign officials with Joe Biden's team have told me when I asked them about young voters that they recognize that that's a problem. And they say things like younger voters care about guns and climate change. And they just don't know those parts of Joe Biden's record. And we're going to make sure they know about that. I don't know if that's enough to get them to come out for Joe Biden. It takes a lot more than just telling young voters about your record to get them enthusiastic enough to show up for the polls. But any nominee for the Democratic Party will need to secure young voters, and not just secure them, but ensure that they turn out in 2020 at the same rates that we saw or higher in 2018 in order to win the election and beat someone like Donald Trump. All
right. Well, then, John, let's say Joe Biden wins the nomination without getting young people's vote. Now we're at the general. They didn't in theory, they didn't back him in the primary. Do they show up to ensure that he beats Trump?
It depends. It depends. They didn't. A generic Democratic candidate starts with about 55% of the support of young people. In order, I think, to lock down the electoral map, that number has to go to 60%. Okay? Barack Obama got to 66 the first time. He got to 60 in 2012, and Hillary Clinton stayed at 55%. So what he needs to do is he needs to talk far more than just what he thinks about gun control or his success in the past. He needs to tap into the unique set of values that young people have. It's not about gun control. It's about changing a gun culture. It's about recognizing the anxiety and the fear that young people have and building a relationship. It's not a transactional generation, and anyone who thinks that is going to have a very, very difficult time securing this vote.
But is it a realistic generation? Emily, you make the point that for Gen Z voters, they're unwilling to compromise, which is, I would love to be, that's my dream. I would love to be unwilling to compromise. They're unwilling to compromise. For them, it is all or nothing. So if you want to secure that vote, how can you secure their vote without losing moderates?
They have to show that they understand the real fears that Gen Z are feeling. They are truly scared in the classroom. They are truly scared of their planet burning. And you have to show that you actually identify those fears and have policies that can address them. I thought the climate forum the other day was really interesting, the way that candidates were pushed on the issue, but also how they framed the issues I thought was very interesting and showed if they can really make that connection. Look, Buttigieg framed it as a moral imperative on climate. Booker talks about climate as being intersectional. That's the kind of language that young people want to see, that you get my fear and you're pushing it into all pieces. It's driving all different pieces of the campaign. You can't just go back to that. I've had a pretty good record on it. Look, the entire Clinton campaign strategy on young people was, well, they're going to be so afraid of Trump that they'll show up. Being afraid of Trump is not enough. I mean, now it's significantly worse that we see what he actually does in office, but it's not enough. They have to have something to inspire them, and there's a lot of structural barriers for young people to vote. They move constantly. They may not understand the system. Having to register on paper is a totally foreign concept. So there's a lot of barriers there. You need a very high margin of them being able to essentially flake to be able to get that high margin of votes.
John, I want to share some of your polling on specific issues. I want to look at environment and climate. When asked about the government doing more to curb climate change, even at the expense of economic growth, 3-to-1 were in favor of government action. That is a huge increase compared to where we were in 2010.
Exactly. In 2010, as many people agreed with that statement, Stephanie, as disagreed. So no issue is changing as rapidly as environment and climate. 45% of all 18 to 29-year-olds think it's an urgent crisis, but significant divides based upon younger people, young Democrats and young Republicans. And I think the other news from the spring 2019 survey that we released, it's now a top objective of a domestic policy agenda, but also foreign policy. Young people consider climate to be a top 3 foreign policy priority, right behind spreading democracy and curbing terrorism. So domestic as well as foreign policy.
Extraordinary. Alexei, it's been reported that candidates have said the toughest questions they are getting from young voters on the trail are around climate change and around gun control. How are they addressing it? I mean, these are gargantuan problems.
I think back to Emily's point, we hear the different ways in which certain candidates have talked about these things in a more intersectional way, especially when we're talking about race and race issues as they relate to these issues. Because it's not just a binary choice or something that you look at in a box. It's something that affects different people who look differently in different ways. And that's how candidates need to be talking about it, and some have been talking about it. I think the other thing we've seen, especially on the issue of guns, is how emotional these candidates have gotten. I think it was Pete Buttigieg recently at an event started tearing up when a young person asked him about guns and safety at school. And I think those moments of just being a normal, real human when talking about these issues as someone who is seeking the highest office in the country is a really important way to connect with young voters who feel this on an emotional level, not a political level.
But are young voters going to be let down? Joe Biden has said there's a lot of great ideas out there, but I know how government works and I know how to get things done. Are young voters, if they go with a progressive candidate that they love, they're excited about, are they going to ultimately get disappointed when they go back and get a Washington that gets nothing done?
Well, that certainly happened in the 2010 midterm election after Obama, that there was a massive youth vote fall off because he had come in with big ideas and wasn't able to deliver even on a Congress that he controlled.
Big ideas die in Washington.
So sad. But I think it really is, I think it is incumbent on the field to be showing unity there, that they can rally behind whoever the nominee is to keep some of the enthusiasm and not just rely on the fear of Trump being reelected.
But John, young voters being idealistic or enthusiastic isn't a new concept.
No, and as Emily said, she hit it. In 2010, they really kind of dropped off. But the key to motivating a young person is to show the tangible difference that engagement can make. And I think that the #1 driver of youth participation was the gun issue in 2018 from a statistical modeling point of view, and the success that those Parkland students had. And they talked about the success. And they didn't change everything, but they made small incremental changes. And in talking about that and talking about how one step at a time is going to be important to work inside as well as outside the system is going to be critical to motivating this generation beyond the big sweeping structural reforms that they want to hear.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.